He was mocked for touching a rich kid's piano, but when his fingers hit the keys, the entire room froze. If you're new here, subscribe and hit that notification bell to never miss another unbreakable tale. In the shadows of Baton Rouge, there lived a boy named Elijah Brooks, a boy with magic in his hands that the world hadn't discovered yet. Elijah didn't talk much, not because he was shy. He just didn't see the point in filling the air when no one seemed to listen anyway. In a cramped two-bedroom apartment near Florida Boulevard, where the walls were paper thin and neighbors argued through them, silence became his closest friend. His mom, Charlene, worked double shifts at a local clinic, bone-tired but never broken. His older brother Isaiah spent most nights with a crowd that made Elijah's stomach tighten with worry. But Elijah? He had music. Not a fancy piano or some state-of-the-art setup like the ones he'd seen in commercials. Just an old, beat-up keyboard at the rec center down the street. Half the keys didn't work anymore. The chords sparked dangerously if you moved it the wrong way. But to Elijah, it was everything. Every afternoon after school, he'd rush over, fingers already moving in his pockets, playing invisible melodies only he could hear. No sheet music, no lessons, just sounds he carried in his head and heart. He played what he felt, sometimes joy, sometimes anger, sometimes the quiet spaces between emotions that had no name. At Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, Elijah kept his head down. He wasn't a troublemaker, but he wasn't a standout either. Teachers rarely noticed how he tapped complex rhythms with his pencil during math, or how his eyes lit up when the morning announcements played the school anthem. Most kids didn't notice him at all, except when they wanted homework answers or someone easy to tease. Piano boy. They'd call him on the rare occasions they acknowledged his existence. His one real escape came from Miss Delacroix, his music teacher. She was the only adult who seemed to see him for more than his quiet. She'd catch him humming during lunch, pull him aside after class, and ask him questions that made him think about chords, scales, how to tell a story with your hands instead of your mouth. "You hear the world different than most people, Elijah," she told him once, after he improvised a lullaby for a class assignment. "Don't ever let that go." He didn't plan to. Then one Thursday morning, just before spring break, the school announced a joint event with Bayside Prep, an elite private school across town. A community arts exchange, they called it, which meant Elijah's class would spend a day attending workshops and watching performances at the other school. Most kids groaned. Elijah sat up straight. Bayside Prep, he'd heard of it. Big lawns, pressed uniforms, a cafeteria that supposedly served sushi. Rumor was their music department had a baby grand in every room. Elijah couldn't even picture that. He'd never touched a real piano before. He'd seen one once, though, at the downtown concert hall when his class got free tickets to the Philharmonic. It gleamed under the stage lights like something out of a dream. He didn't hear most of that concert. He was too busy watching the pianist's hands dance across those ivory keys, creating magic. Now he had a chance to see one for himself. Maybe even play one, if no one was looking. Charlene ironed his best shirt the night before the trip, even though it had a small stain near the cuff that wouldn't come out. "You behave," she said, not looking up from the ironing board. "Don't go embarrassing me in front of those people." "I won't." "Don't touch nothing you're not supposed to." He nodded. He meant it too. But music had a way of making him forget rules. The bus ride to Bayside Prep was only 30 minutes, but it felt like Elijah had stepped onto another planet. As they pulled through the iron gates, he stared out the window at rows of perfectly trimmed hedges, fountains that actually worked, and buildings that looked more like museums than classrooms. Kids in matching navy blazers stood in groups, laughing the way people do when they don't have to think about what might happen tomorrow. Everything seemed too clean, too still. Even the sidewalks felt expensive. Elijah followed his classmates off the bus, gripping the strap of his backpack so tight his knuckles paled. He didn't say much, just took in the sight of a courtyard with a bronze statue in the center, some founder with a scroll in one hand and a smug grin carved into his face. Inside, the floors shone like glass. The hallways smelled like lemon polish and fresh paper. No graffiti, no cracked tiles, no teachers yelling from down the hall, just quiet confidence. They were herded into an auditorium where the Bayside students were already seated in neat rows. An older man with silver hair welcomed them with the same voice people use at church. He said a few things about unity and creative expression and called the event a celebration of talent from all backgrounds. Elijah looked around and counted. Out of everyone in the room, he was one of maybe 5 black students. Most of the Bayside kids looked like they'd never missed a meal, never been told not today, never had to wait until Friday for new socks. They split into breakout sessions. Elijah was assigned to a songwriting workshop in room 208. He walked there with a group of kids he didn't know, staying quiet while others made jokes about cafeteria food and whose Tesla their parents drove. Room 208 was a music room, all right, but not like the one back home. This one had floor-to-ceiling windows, soundproof walls, and instruments lined up like soldiers. Guitars, violins, a cello in the corner. But what caught Elijah's eye was the piano, a gleaming black Steinway Grand, bigger than any instrument he'd ever touched. The lid was open, the keys polished like bone. The instructor hadn't arrived yet, and most of the kids took seats without much interest. Elijah didn't. He stood by the wall, eyes locked on the piano, like it was daring him. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Don't even think about it." He turned. A tall boy with slick-back blonde hair was staring at him, flanked by 2 others who looked like they practiced scowling in the mirror. The tall one was wearing a monogrammed blazer, PJW stitched on the chest. "That's my dad's donation," the boy added, nodding toward the piano. "You got anything like that in your neighborhood?" Elijah blinked, unsure if the kid was being serious or just trying to get a reaction. "I wasn't going to break it," he said quietly. "You sure about that?" The boy smirked. "Careful, those keys aren't made for dirty fingers." The words hit like a slap. The room got quieter. A few other students turned to watch. Elijah felt heat rise to his ears, but he didn't move. His hands stayed at his sides. The piano seemed farther away now, like it had shifted into another dimension. Part of him wanted to walk out. Another part wanted to speak, but he didn't trust his voice to come out steady. But then someone behind him laughed, and that was all it took for something inside Elijah to change. Elijah didn't remember making the decision. 1 second he was standing still, cheeks hot and heart pounding, and the next he was walking toward the piano. The smirk on the blond boy's face cracked just slightly. His buddies exchanged a look like they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Elijah didn't flinch. He pulled the bench out with both hands and sat down slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His palms were damp, his throat dry, but his fingers didn't shake. The room was still. Not silent, but still, like a breath held too long. The instructor hadn't come in yet. Maybe that was a blessing. Maybe it was fate. Elijah raised his hands above the keys. Then he hesitated, because this wasn't the busted keyboard from the rec center. This was real. This was weight. This was sound that carried and echoed and filled a room, not because of volume, but because of presence. He could feel every eye on his back. He could hear Preston's voice echoing inside his head. Dirty fingers, like his skin had somehow stained the air. He took one more breath and pressed the first key, a simple C, soft, clean. It rang out like it had been waiting for him. Then came an E, then G. He built the chord the way he always did, by feel. No one told him how, and no one had to. Music was the only thing that ever made sense without needing to be explained. He let his left hand follow, walking bass notes, gentle at first, then stronger. Then the right hand returned, weaving a melody over the rhythm, something familiar but unfinished. It was the tune he always played to himself when he was alone, the one he'd never named because it felt too personal, a song that didn't need words to say what he couldn't. The room began to shift. Conversations stopped. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. The 2 boys who stood behind Preston no longer looked amused. They looked confused. Preston didn't speak, but his mouth tightened. And Elijah? He didn't even notice anymore. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for the nights he spent alone in his room, listening to the sounds of his city outside his window. He was playing for the Sundays when his mother swayed to gospel at church, eyes closed, face soft for once. He was playing for the version of himself that had never been told, "Don't touch that." The music swelled. His hands flew faster now, confident and sharp. It wasn't perfect. He missed a note, stumbled on a chord, but it didn't matter. It was raw, alive. the kind of playing that didn't ask permission. When he stopped, the room didn't react right away. There was a pause, the kind that usually follows a punch in the gut. Then a girl near the back let out a soft, "Whoa." Another student clapped. A few others joined. Preston didn't move. His hands were clenched at his sides. "That wasn't bad," one of his friends muttered, but Elijah heard something else in his voice. It was respect. The door creaked open. The instructor finally walked in, holding a clipboard. She paused mid-step, looking from Elijah to the stunned class. "Did I miss something?" she asked. A kid near the front nodded slowly. "Yeah, you did." Word spread fast. By afternoon, Elijah found himself performing in the school's auditorium. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of playing, but from the weight of being seen. Miss Delacroix appeared beside him backstage, her voice low. "They're going to love you." "What if I mess up?" he asked. "You won't. And even if you do, they'll still feel it." That helped a little. He stepped out on stage. This time he played a slower, quieter piece, more patient, like a letter written out loud. It started with the kind of ache you can't name, then shifted, grew warmer, braver, like something fighting to stand on its own feet. The room stilled. Even the faculty stopped whispering. Phones lowered, eyes lifted. When the last note faded, he lifted his hand slowly, like releasing something heavy. The applause was real, full. Some students stood. One teacher wiped her eye. That performance changed everything. A summer scholarship to the Baton Rouge School for the Arts. Real training. A chance Preston's money couldn't buy and Elijah's poverty couldn't prevent. 6 months later, Elijah returned to Bayside Prep, not as a visitor, but as an invited performer for their fall recital. Taller now, more confident. His mother in the front row, clutching the edge of her seat, watching her son become something neither of them had dared imagine. And when a small boy approached him after the show, whispering, "That made me want to try piano too," Elijah knelt down and said, "You should." "I don't know how." "Doesn't matter. Just start." That night, Elijah wrote in his notebook, "You don't have to be invited to be allowed." The world hadn't given him permission to sit at that piano. He'd taken it, gently, honestly, fully. And in doing so, he'd reminded them, and himself, that talent doesn't care where you're from, what you wear, or how much your parents donated. It only cares that you listen when it calls. So if you're watching this and wondering whether you're good enough, whether you're allowed to try, here's your sign. You are. Now, go do it. This has been another Unbreakable tale. Remember, sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is the one you've been afraid to make.